Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to a special episode of Holden's 11. We have a great topic tonight, and even better, I have a terrific guest. This is somebody I admire very much. I'm a fan of his work. Please welcome author and creator JD Calderon. Welcome, JD.
Thank you, Tim. It's a pleasure being here, and listen, I'm looking forward to it.
This is a good one, man. I've been looking forward to this also. This is a topic we're both excited about. Tonight, we're going to talk about the top 11 animated films.
Well, our top 11.
Yeah, and this is our top 11. And, you know, I like to remind the viewers, well, there's two things in this case. The first is that the list is really in no way a ranking of one film being better than another. Of course, art is subjective. It's just we organize them so that we could talk about them. And the second thing is, you know, on these lists that we make, they always have a set of rules. And what I mean by that, we almost have to, because pretty soon you get these enormous, unwieldy lists that are very difficult to manage. So for our topic tonight, it's the top 11 animated films, but no Disney films, no CGI, and no anime.
Yeah, now, those it's tough cutting those out.
Yeah, it was. And, you know, you and I talked about this backstage. And one of the reasons, of course, is it's almost enough for its own list when you start to include those. And we'll probably get together again, I imagine, and do the next ones. But so, and one of the things that you and I said, which might be cool, we're going to focus a little bit on what some people might consider lesser known films. You know, these aren't going to necessarily be the great big ones. They're just ones that you and I think are kind of cool, right?
Yes.
So without further ado, let's jump right into it. This is our number 11. This is Titan AE. This is from the year 2000, directed by Don Bluth. Are you familiar with that one?
Yes, it's been a while since I've seen it, and my understanding is that Don was brought in towards the tail end of the production, or like midway through the production, and to finish it, because I guess they were having issues, and they needed someone who could write that ship and finish it off. And I believe it was his last production, like the last thing he did before he retired. Now he's, I believe he runs an animation school. So.
Gotcha. Yeah. And, you know, I'm a fan of this film too, for multiple reasons. One of my main reasons is I love the score. You know, I'm a musician and there's a terrific soundtrack to this film. It's a little bit like the hard rock sci-fi film. But of course, I'm going to save that because we have another one coming up that's even more that one. But it's also pretty well cast. You got, who's that? It's Matt Damon, Janine Garofalo. You know, it's a good voice cast. John Leguizamo is in there as Goon. And I remember when I saw it the first time, a lot of people don't necessarily love Don Bluth films. I do, just to state for the record. But sometimes people are very diehard about Disney, or in some cases, you know, lately it's maybe more anime. But the thing that's cool about Titan AE is it really embraces the sci-fi elements. And there's a couple of parts that really are, it's a blend of traditional animation and modern computer animation. For example, they've got, you know, it couldn't have really been done in a regular film like the, you know, they have the hydrogen domes of the planet Gaul. That part's really cool. And of course, at the end, they're escaping through the ice fields that in the asteroid belt. It's visually a stunning film, and highly recommended to the viewers if you haven't seen that one.
Definitely. Like I said, it's what's funny. It's been a while since I've seen it, so I'm gonna probably have to refresh. You know, take a sit back, and give it a rewatch.
Yeah, and it's kind of fun to go over the ones that aren't necessarily so popular, right? Because they. You know, there's always parts of a movie that stick in our heads. And that was always one of the ones for me. Titan AE has a cool line in the end. And it's where he goes to meet his father at the very end. And it's a hologram comes out and he says something to the effect of, "Cale, I'm sorry, but if you're seeing this recording, I did not survive the attack on planet Earth. I'm sorry to have broken my promise to see you again." And I remember thinking, wow, that's a really cool script. And of course, it stuck with me all these years. And you could probably make an argument that certain elements of this script have worked their way into some of my works as well.
Yeah, listen, good stories will do that.
Right, that's really the ticket. And I'll tell you, this will be super prevalent in our next choice here. This is our number 10, Lord of the Rings. That's from 1978. Now, this is the Ralph Bakshi version talking about. What's your thoughts on the 78 version?
I enjoyed it. What's funny is my brother, I was a kid, 78, what I would have been 10. I remember my brother took me to go see it. Him and his wife, they took me to go see it. I remember going to the movie theater, sitting down, and I remember falling asleep. Um, and that's what I remember the film. But I have seen it since then. I remember enjoying it. It's interesting to see the things that they did with it, with the story, as opposed to like, let's say, like, the movies that we're all accustomed to knowing and seeing. And it's different, it has a different feel to it, So it's again, it's one of those films I haven't seen in a while, So
Yeah.
it's another one that I need a refresher on. So, but yeah, but I really, really enjoyed that movie.
Yeah, one of my favorites too. And I like to point out, we're talking about a film that's almost 50 years old, right? So considering that some of these films kind of have held up fairly well. And
Yeah.
when you think about somebody in 1978 saying, I want to make a film based on Tolkien's work.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily work that adapts very easily.
Yeah, I'm surprised he got the license. Because
right.
because they had given all the other times they've given a really hard time for getting the license. So,
sure. Sure.
But yeah, he got it, which was good for him.
And there's some cool trivia about this too I want to share to the viewers. This is one of the early roles for Anthony Daniels, who became better known as C-3PO, but of course he provided the voice acting for Legolas in this film.
Nice.
If you go back and listen to it, you can tell too. It's like, oh, he does sound kind of like the British actor. I guess supposedly he was like a classically trained voice actor and could do all kinds of different voices. I think it would have been much more successful, but if you remember, the movie, it sort of pulls the plug right at a critical time, right? It goes to the Battle of Helm's Deep and then stops rather abruptly, because I guess the plan was it was going to be divided into two halves, and then there was a falling out with the studio, and of course they never made the second half. But it feels odd where they broke it. It feels like and by the way, I'm not disparaging it, I get it, but it feels like an unfinished film.
Yeah, it's an unfinished narrative. I mean, it'll do that to anybody.
Yeah.
It's like getting the to be continued at page 192 of a novel. You're like, what the hell?
Yeah, what's going on here, man? What's going on here?
Yeah.
And honorable mention, there was a number of years later, there was a version put out, The Return of the King.
Rankin and Bass.
Right. And we love Rankin and Bass. And I'm going to save some of those comments because that's coming up shortly down the road here. But we'll move on here to our number 9, which this is moving back to Don Bluth. And when you talk about the lesser known animated films, we're going to see some of the names crop up again and again. This is Anastasia from 1997. What's your thoughts on that one?
I think a fascinating film. I thought the whole story of the missing daughter, right, of the Tsar, right, that got away, right. I mean, it's one of those things. What's funny is I have a shirt of the Mothman, and I consider it no different. It's like it's one of those things where it's just, is it possible? Maybe. Did it happen? Maybe. Did those diamonds in their corset save them? Maybe. Right. So it's yeah. And not to mention the animation in the movie is beautiful.
It really is.
Yeah, I mean, aside from another film that we'll be talking about, this is, I think, a very high watermark for him. And
I think so too. And in particular, they have the ballroom scene, and it would be a crime if I didn't mention how good the score was. And of course, I'm talking about Once Upon a December, which is kind of the main song. There's a couple of great songs in the film, but that's kind of the main one that lived on, and people covered in karaoke and things like that now. And of course, and I had to, by the way, full disclosure, I had to call my daughter tonight. She is an avid theater goer, and I took her to see the Broadway version of Anastasia. And, I was just captivated by the costumes and the sumptuous scenery and the music and all this. But I couldn't remember, did the song come first in the animated version, or was it in the play first? And I guess the way it breaks down is the song was first in the animated film, but there was a 1954 play, then there was a 1956 movie, and they're all a little different, then the 1997 animated film, and then the hit Broadway play. So she assured me that that's the way that the progression went. Viewers, if I got this wrong, feel free to sound off in the comments. I'm often wrong about these kind of things. But now, when you say it's one of his high water marks, could you expand on that a little? What do you mean by that, JD?
Well, I mean, for myself, I mean, post Disney, I mean, I think it's and posted on the movie that we're going to talk about. I think it's a high watermark from as far as like the detail in the animation, how smooth it flows. There's just you could just tell there's a mastery of craft in that film. That few animated features ever get.
Right.
I mean, even in today with all the CGI stuff, you're just like, I mean, you can tell. But when they're doing cell animation, there's a great deal of care that goes into these films, especially when you have someone as meticulous as Don Bluth,
Yeah.
trying to do something special.
Yeah, and he was taking great pains to kind of be, I almost want to say the next Disney, but I don't think that's the right way to put it. He wanted to stand apart and to sort of form his own empire, and
Right.
by the way, I'm not ripping on Disney, as we both love Disney, right? So the only reason why we don't have them on this list is because it quickly would be dominated by Disney films, right?
Yeah.
So I would say the thing about Don Bluth, he kind of tackles this unusual source material. You got this, the sci-fi film, post-apocalyptic. You've got, Anastasia, the Russian family, and the ballroom stuff. It's very unique and in some ways very different than Disney.
Very much.
So speaking of stuff that's a little bit different, this is one of my all-time favorites, right? This is number 8. It's from 1997. Excuse me. That's from 1977. That's Wizards by Ralph Bakshi.
Right.
So are you a fan of this one?
Yes. That one I saw not too long, probably about a year ago I saw it. And I mean, yeah, it holds up very well. I think it's he stylistically in the film, you can see where he goes from rotoscope traditional animation, and you can see like what he does with the penciling in the backgrounds, right? He'll just use like it's almost straight pencils, in those backgrounds, and it to very good effect. I thought it was very, very interesting film. Yeah, again, it's like I said, I saw it a year ago, and now I'm like, damn, I gotta watch it again.
Yeah, you're right. It holds up well, and
yeah.
I definitely agree with you. The backgrounds in Wizards are, they have like some cool wash effects, and there's a great use of color. It's, for 1977, that there was nobody really doing that yet. You know what I mean?
Right. I mean, I'm pretty sure there was someone doing it, but I don't think they did it to the level. Like they were probably doing it in smaller things. Maybe they've done in commercials, and they've maybe done 1 or 2 spots in like a Saturday morning cartoon, but it's not something they could feasibly do for a full feature or like for the whole thing. So they were like, let's keep this in our pocket, and then when we could really do it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And just a quick aside, again, viewers, if you haven't seen this one, it's basically like a battle between magic and technology in a post-apocalyptic setting. And it has some really cool character designs.
Yes, it's two brothers at war, and their mother was a fairy. And
right.
They're and they're both given magic. One of them's evil, one of them's good, and like brothers, they're just having a dispute. I believe I'm blanking on a bunch of names right now, of course. But there was I believe it was a lot of stylistically was taken from a 1970s underground artist. Yeah, and of course I'm drawing a blank, so we'll just have to leave it at that for now.
I can always edit that into the comments.
Yeah.
Now, I will say that, I loved there's the red guy, Peace, who's like the assassin on that. He's one of my favorite characters of all time. As a matter of fact, he's my Kickstarter ID profile image.
Right.
Because it's just obscure enough to, the right person will get it. Hey, there's the guy from Wizards, and he starts out as kind of like a violent assassin, right? And then they transform him into this kind of peaceful character. And he rides on some kind of ostrich, or it's some kind of weird bipedal mount. So highly recommended.
Yes. It's one of those films, like I said, you can watch over and over again. I think you'll see something different every time.
Yeah. Definitely a seminal kind of film. It's easier to imagine these days than it is in 1977. And I say that because, and some of this I might have a little wrong, but initially the movie was conceived as a little bit of an all ages movie. But then when it was produced, of course, there was a little bit of pushback, and the studio's like, hey, wait a minute, it's pretty violent.
Yeah.
And there's also like some, you might call it Nazi imagery. Remember, there's some army type scenes that are very
Yeah.
brown shirtish, for lack of a better word. And it's also kind of sexy. I remember the fairies not having a whole lot of clothes on, you know?
Yeah.
Which, not that there's anything wrong with the careful delineation of the female form. That's something we can all get behind, right? But, you know, for what was going to be an all ages film, I'm sure it raised a few eyebrows in 77.
I think if anyone wanted to see the stuff that I think it was inspired by, look up Von Bodie and Cheech Wizard. Though that's Von Bodie is definitely, I believe, the thought father behind this film.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. I'll check that out. You know, I love the inspirations and the influences that have led to these types of films. And I got to say, you're going to love this next one. Ready? This is from 1986. This is our number 7, Transformers. So a little bit of the old school Transformers, right?
Yes. That's as a real soft spot in my heart for that film. 1986, I was 17 years old, rough and tumble kid out of you know, some Spanish Harlem, right? You know, New York City. Going with a friend. It was only showing in one theater in the city, 10:30 p.m. showing, and it was up on 110th Street, all the way up on the west side in Harlem. And it was an area we didn't go into, right? Because we were from a little bit further downtown. We just didn't go into that area. And it's funny, we go up, we watch this movie. It's 10:30 at night, mind you, and we go there, and the theater is packed with young men such as ourselves, between the ages of 16 and early 20s, right? No older than that, I think. And a bunch of rough and tumble type of guys, you know, might say hoodlums, right? We were all, that's what we all, that's what we all, this was us. This is who we were. And when Optimus Prime, spoilers, right?
It's okay. You're past the 40-year mark now. So
I would think so, yeah. Spoilers, right? Optimus Prime dies. And it's hilarious because to hear the entire room verklempt as they're like sniffling, everyone in the room is like, Optimus, right? It's just hilarious. It's so funny. It's one of those it's one of those things that occurred that is very clear in my mind, because it was a group of rough kids. Like, these were like some rough kids. Yeah. Right.
Interesting.
And
interesting.
You know, because Optimus Prime to a lot of us, this was like our metaphorical father, right? This was our dad, you know, metaphorically speaking. This is someone we could look up to, you know, especially for those guys who were raised in a single family homes, raised by their moms. You know, I didn't have that issue, but you know, I definitely had friends who did. So yeah, it was very, very touching. And to this day, I can't watch that movie. I can't watch that film without getting verklempt at that scene.
Right. It's powerful. It's powerful. And that is Peter Cullen, right? It's one of his first times, I think, isn't it?
Terrible. I'm
pretty sure it is.
Yeah.
And also, there's another interesting kind of trivia. Orson Welles, who has this very distinctive voice, he was Unicron, I believe.
Yes, he was
Unicron. And it was also his last film role ever, because he was in a little bit of, he was in poor health. And my understanding is this is very advanced for the time. They used a synthesizer to enhance his voice to get it to where they needed it to be, because I guess he was even a little bit weak during the recording of his lines. So pretty interesting. And let me ask you this question, JD, because this is a terrific topic for you. Did you have any inclination that in 1986, the Transformers were going to keep going? I mean, it's an intergenerational phenomenon. Like, obviously, that was super new at the time, and it was cool. I remember it. But if you would have said to me, hey, this is going to become a huge blockbuster franchise, and we're still going to be talking about this 40 years later, I would have said you were out of your mind.
Yeah, you know, no idea. Who knew, right? I mean, I would have invested in stock.
Well, it kind of proves that theory, and you and I talk about this in comics fairly often, that nostalgia is one of the most powerful elements of any media property. And even to the extent that sometimes the property's sometimes not very good, honestly, and people will still flock to go see it. And that's true of everything from Star Wars to comics to music. You know, it just happens all the time. So I'm always curious to see what the next element will be. Like, say, for example, the current generation, you know.
Yeah, what's going to stick?
I know one of the things, this is just one man's opinion, but of course, video games have become such a prevalent part of modern society and of youth. You know, some people look to video games the same way guys like you and I would have looked to these classic films and classic animated properties. So my bet is that's going to be the next one.
The next one.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll see. I mean, it's funny to think. I mean, you know, when I was a kid, I was playing video games, right? But we were playing, was it Street Fighter and
Oh, sure.
you know, what Defender and Time Pilot and you know all these crazy games from back in the day.
Yeah.
And you know, they come and go, right? From that zeitgeist, they come and go. You know, like didn't they do a Pac-Man movie? And didn't they do an Alien? Was it Alien? The one where I forgot the name of the film, but it was one based on one of these classic video games, and it's a game that's probably literally 45 years old.
Well, you know? You have a great point there, and you know, I'll tell you, I have a great Space Invaders. That's exactly where I was going with it.
Yep.
You know, I can remember, and like I'm an older guy too, so I can remember we used to have what they called a pinball hall down the street from my house. And it was basically, parents didn't much like it because in those days, pinball had sort of an element of, it was sort of where the hoodlums hung out, you know, and they'd be smoking cigarettes. And some parents even considered it like gambling a little bit. I don't know why, but, you know, they didn't like when you were there. But we used to fill up our pockets with quarters and we go down there and we try and win free games. We'd be there all Saturday afternoon. And I can remember the day they rolled out the Bally machine. The machine they took out was called Future Spa. It's a double size. You can look it up online if you like. And they rolled in the new machine and we all turned over and we went, what's Space Invaders? And man, a new media form was born, and it was, we were hooked on it, by the way. I mean, we all jumped right on. And if you remember, when you got the high score, you could even put your initials in. So rather than try to win free games, it was all about getting your initials in that top spot. Space Invaders, man, hard to believe now. So let's move on to our next one, because I'm excited about this one, and I think you will dig this too. This is our number 6. It's from 1981. This is the movie Heavy Metal. What do you think of this one, JD?
Listen, I mean, very strange, weird movie, right?
It is. It is, actually.
You know, it's a lot of fun, but it was meant to be like the magazine, strange and weird, right?
Strange and weird,
You have, what is it, Bernie Wrightson's Stern, right?
Yeah.
You have was it Rick Veitch? Is he the one with the I think with the airplane and the pilot, and they have like the zombies on the fighter jets, and that's it. I mean, it's just a very bizarre.
And one of them's a Mobius story,
right? Yep.
The one with the one with the cab driver.
Yeah, I believe so.
And they're all kind of loosely tied together by this mystical orb. The stories don't go together too well, but it's the Lochnar is the name of the orb. Remember the Lochnar? Yeah, so
the Lochnar,
yeah, and the art of it was particularly, I'm trying to think of the best way to put this. It was kind of eclectic, you know.
It's fascinating. It's good. It was crude. Right, it was crude animation, but good art. Right, I was like that's the weirdest thing about it is like, you know, you could tell the base of the art was good, but you could tell they were trying to animate unconventional styles that weren't normally animated.
Correct. So, yeah, exactly. They were styles that didn't necessarily lend themselves to animation either.
Right, exactly.
And the other thing that was kind of interesting, when you talk about heavy metal, and this of course seems tame now, but again, this is 1981. There was a lot of violence, a lot of sex, and a lot of nudity. Like there was a good bit of nudity in that movie, actually. And it'd be fair to say that all of the women and the men were all pretty bodaciously drawn.
Right. Well, I do believe Richard Corbin had a hand in it.
Right.
So yeah, he would have shown some very, very
His character was Den, right? Do I have that right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I was a fan of his too. Now, I will admit to you, when I saw Heavy Metal the first time, I was not familiar with the magazine yet. And the reason why, where I had been raised, that magazine would have been more toward the adult section of the magazines being sold, if you know what I mean.
Gotcha. Yeah,
This
no,
would have been
no,
on,
definitely.
right. So like I can remember going into the store and I could buy like, well, I think you and I talked about this before. You know, of course, I loved comics, and there was also what they called the Curtis magazines, and they were like black and white horror magazines, and
Oh, right.
Marvel
Born.
Premiere and Planet of the Apes. And I was a
Mhm.
huge fan of eerie and creepy, and I couldn't
Right.
get enough of those classically rendered pencil magazines. But I
Mhm.
hadn't yet stumbled across heavy metal, because it would have been over on the next rack where the magazines, some of them had like a paper cover on them
Right.
concealing what was inside, you know.
Yeah.
And I guess it would be a crime if I didn't mention, of course, a pretty progressive soundtrack for 81. You know, you had Black Sabbath, Don Felder, Sammy Hagar. I do remember being a little frustrated that it wasn't as heavy as I hoped, because heavy metal was already a thing by then. And Black Sabbath is very heavy, but I think you could make the point the other bands weren't too heavy. Like they would have benefited from having, let's see, who was around in 81? Well, Iron Maiden would have been around. Judas Priest would have been around. Something a little, what I would say, edgier, you know.
Right.
Don Felder, you know, he didn't really have the street cred to be a heavy metal guy. And of course, he got the title track. I believe he was one of the founding members of the Eagles. That's why he got the gig, as it were, but not necessarily a very heavy dude. So let's move on to our next one. This is one I know you're a fan of, and I am too. It's our number 5. This is from 1977. This is the Rankin Bass version of The Hobbit.
Oh yeah.
What's your thoughts on that one?
Definitely one of my favorites. It's funny. There's a song in there where the two hobbits, when they're captured, and it's where there's a whip, there's a way.
Yeah, I love it. I know exactly where you're going.
Right, and it's one of those things where it's just like, why was not in the Peter Jackson film?
Right.
Right. It's one of those things where I just wanted to see it, and they didn't use it. I was, damn. But you know, it was one of those. It's very funny.
Yeah, and just a super charming version. And you know, we'll just touch on that a little bit, which is one of the elements of the modern film version of The Hobbit. Well, there was essentially 2 flaws, in my opinion. This is one man's opinion. Viewers, feel free to flame me. I love Peter Jackson. I'm not saying that. But he didn't capture the charm, which is the essence of the Hobbit story. And he veered off course, and he put a lot of elements in his films, 3 films, that are not in the book at all. And I feel it did the source material a disservice. Whereas the producer of the Rankin Bass version said words to the effect of, I'm not putting anything in that is not in the original works. He was a fan of Tolkien's work. And at the time, it was even public domain, I understand, which is how they got.
Oh, really?
One of the reasons why they were able to do it so easily.
Yeah. What's funny is I do believe, I think I was wrong. The song is actually from the Return of the King film.
Oh, the whip. There's a way.
Yeah, where there's a whip. It's when I think Bilbo and Samwise, they put on the armor and they capture, but they're running.
Oh yeah, you might be right. But there is listen, you're in the right church, so to speak, because there is a song in The Hobbit where they are. It's when they're in the caves and there's the goblins are singing, and it's this, and it's a very rousing kind of. And by the way, you know, I'd like to quick point out that's also very accurate to the Tolkien source material, because a lot of, you know, remember it had the little poems and so forth in there, and that stuff would have been in there. I don't think the lyrics were necessarily the same, because it was more of a production, but I do think that they captured the essence of it. What did you think of the art style for The Hobbit?
I love it. I mean, I love it. You know, it's funny. It's what I always wanted, because you know I'm a notorious collector of things, right? So I've always wanted like little maquettes of those, you know, Bilbo and all of them, and you know, all those various characters. And I thought, man, why hasn't anybody, you know, touched on that to make the little maquettes of those figures? Because it's very interesting art style. It is.
It really is.
The only person I've ever seen drawing even a similar style was his name's David Wenzel. He did an adaptation of The Hobbit, and he kind of drew it in that style, you know, and it was very in David Wenzel's beautiful watercolor work.
Are you talking about the 3-volume graphic novel set of The Hobbit? That one, or which version are you referring to?
No, I believe it's just one graphic novel. I'm blanking on who did the adaptation. It's a fairly famous comic writer, but I believe it was produced by Eclipse back
Oh,
in
yeah,
the day.
yeah. That is the one I'm talking about.
Oh,
That was
okay.
one that you could have bought it as 3 floppies, or of course it was
Oh,
released then as
yeah,
the
as a trade.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I love that art style, by the way. I
Yeah.
thought he did a terrific job. And incidentally, that's one of my favorite renderings of Gandalf.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah, they did a great
With
job
the
with that.
long
Yeah,
look.
and
Yeah.
he's really whiskered and kind of cool.
Yeah.
So I got a great one next. This is our number 4. This is from 1982, The Secret of Nim. What's your thoughts on that one?
Don Bluth, his his entry point after Disney. You know, when he came out and he was just like, "This is how it's done, guys. This is how it's supposed to be done."
Yeah.
Right? Because that's why he left Disney. He wanted to make the best animated feature he can make, and I think he made it. He made it in The Secret of Nim. And as far as high watermarks in his career, I believe this is as high as he got.
I'm glad you said that, because I was just going to chime in. You mentioned earlier about the high watermark. I would say story-wise, Secret of Nim was probably the high watermark. It has one of the most memorable stories, and certainly recommended. Viewers, if you have not seen The Secret of Nim, you drop everything you're doing and go check it out. It's that good.
Yeah, it's a beautiful film. I've never read the book that it's based on. What is it? It's the Rats of Nim, I believe it's called.
Yeah, sure.
I've never read the book. I eventually have to get around to it. But the movie is incredible. I mean, I love the film. I love the story. It has a wonderful heart to it. It's a mother trying to protect her child, you know, and the rats moving on, right, so to speak. These intelligent rats trying to move on, you know. But what I thought was hilarious is that, you know, the rats are intelligent, but so are all the other animals. It's just the rats were a little bit more intelligent.
Right. And of course, it has like sort of a little twist. It's
yeah,
got a mental health angle, which is, I think that'd be very well received today. But for its time, kind of a progressive concept, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I think that's true of a lot of these films that, well, especially the ones on our list here today, because most of them aren't really what you and I would call blockbusters or even a sure thing in the market. And, I admire the courage of some of these guys who said something like, well, let's try The Secret of Nim. This is going to be a big hit, because it's sure is taking a chance.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, just him leaving Disney to go make his own animated feature. Talk about a chance. I mean, like, I don't know all of the particular detail. I haven't looked into it in a long time, but it's like, who bankrolled that? Right. And the risk they were taking, like, oh, they're going to go up against Disney. And I think what came out with it, I think it might have been the Black Cauldron.
Oh, right.
Might have come out. And that was, a lot of people say, it was one of their worst movies. Right. Because, it just was half finished and just doesn't look very good. It's one of those films, again, I have to go back. What's hilarious is I have I have a poster, a Mondo poster by Franco Villanova. I forget his name. He's an artist. He did a lot of comic books. But he did a poster for Mondo. I don't know if you know Mondo. They're the guys that produce the Mondo posters. And I have it for the Black Cauldron. The movies are good, but the poster's beautiful.
Yeah, I love movie posters. And full disclosure, you and I are both engaged in making comics, right? When I get into covers, I'm a big fan of Drew Struzan and some of these, I guess what you and I might call classic movie posters now, because they're 70s and 80s. Yeah. But often that is the flavor that we go for. And sometimes people say to me, hey, this seems a little bit like X, and I would say, hey, man, you got it, Right. Guilty as charged. That's kind of what I was going for. Because I think that, what's the right way to say this? It's difficult making comic book covers is sometimes more difficult than making the page, because, in the page you have the beat, we call it, of what the action is, and you just have to convey the action and push the plot forward one more notch. But when you're making the cover, you've got to capture the characterization, right, the visual element of what the plot is about, and also have something kind of catchy that makes somebody say, hey, I want to look inside there. You know, so it's a delicate balance.
Do you do a lot of art direction on your covers?
I do, but in my case, I'm lucky enough to work with some really terrific artists, as you know, and I'm one of those guys. I have a certain amount of guys in my team, and one or two gals as well, and I trust them enough to, you know, I have written instructions, you know, but if they run a little bit, you know, you let them run. You got to let out a little rope, because always the best effort is, of course, collaborative. And they're going to come up with something every time that's a little bit better than maybe what I thought of. But once you get what, like I work with Erwin Arroza a lot. In fact, you'll see him behind me here, the Hunchback. And once you get a couple of covers by a person like that, you kind of know where they're going to go with it. So you trust their instinct a little, you know what I mean? Just capture the theme of the story. And it doesn't always have to be, what's the right way to say this one? It doesn't necessarily have to be details or even necessarily something that was in the plot. It can be done through things like lighting, the sizing of the characters, the dynamics of it. There's ways to convey that visually that are not necessarily by showing what happened. You know, ways to infer mystery or to infer danger, things like that. So,
yeah, I tend to. So it depends. Like I have my regular series artist, Jade Gonzalez. This is her piece behind me. That's one of the cover that'll eventually be coming up. But, you know, I trust her to like present the story the way she wants to present it. So that's one of her covers. The one above it is done by Donny Hadijawa. And with him, I sent him the issue that it's based on. And he came up with the illustration of the dragon with Oswald in it. And, you know, it's a scene from the book. But, you know, it has a lot of power and has a lot of animation.
It's kind of stylized a little bit. Yeah, and I'm familiar with his work too. And again, a terrific choice. I'm a fan of your work, JD. We've talked about this before. And by the way, you're a natural for this topic because, you know, some of your work, I think, two things. First of all, you do something that's different than what everybody's doing. And I got to tell you, I admire that so much already, because I feel that the comic market in particular, there's a lot of, not copycats necessarily, but there's quite a bit of what I call derivative material. And I try to veer away from that. And, you know, you were just blazing a trail, man, doing your own thing. And some of these works that we're talking about tonight, I sense a little bit of influence in your work that came from some of these classic films.
Oh, yeah. Definitely something like, you know, Secret of Nim, definitely. Like I said, with the Oswald Chronicles, a mouse, and, you know, you have the magic element to it. And there's definitely those darker elements, you know, creep into my work. And yeah, I mean, you know, for me, it was always important, like, if I'm going to do something weird, like if I'm going to do a comic, excuse me, I want to do something a little weird and strange, right? I don't pick up comics to go look outside my window, right? I can look outside my window whenever I want. I can go walk amongst, you know, people and talk to them and have a good time. But I want to present worlds, you know, that are just so beyond. They're just like, what is this guy's out there, right? And that's what I like, you know. Those are the things that I enjoy, you know. And that's, you know, it creeps in there, you know. And we do it, and we just try to have as much fun with it as we can.
Yeah, you guys are doing a good job over there, man.
We're trying.
So tell you what, let's move on to our number 3. And I want to make a quick comment while we're talking about the anthropomorphic animals. I'm not sure, somehow when we comprised our list, I forgot to mention Watership Down, which is another. Yeah. I take it you're a fan of Watership Down.
I've never seen it.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Well, we would have left it off the list then. But boy, it's terrific. And one of my favorite books of all time, by the way.
I've never seen it. Yeah, Daphne is a huge fan of it, but I've
oh, no kidding?
Oh, yeah. Oh, huge fan.
Yeah, what brought it to mind is when you said, you know, there's ways to show danger that will propel the elements of the story. And it's sometimes more effective if it's not a human being that's in the danger. And that's something they do to great effect in Watership Down. It's something. And by the way, that one's not for everybody either. It can be a little bit, bit intense for the younger theater goers.
Yeah, I've never seen that one. Never seen Animal Farm either.
Yeah, I didn't see Animal Farm. I didn't see Animal
Okay.
Farm. So
Yeah,
I'm a
but
fan of the book.
Right.
I'm a fan. And by the way, there was a remake on Netflix about, I got to say, it was probably 4 or 5 years ago for Watership Down. But I believe that was a CGI one.
I believe so. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, I got a great one for number 3. Are you ready for this?
Mhm.
And maybe this should have been number 1. So viewers, you can attack me in the comments if you want. But I'm a huge fan of this one. This is 1999 from Brad Bird, The Iron Giant.
Yep. Fantastic film. Love the style choices of the film.
Yeah.
And just the story of, a young boy finding himself and, making friends with this alien entity, right?
Yeah.
And trying to protect his friend. So yeah, great film. Love the heart of the film. But it's funny. It's one of these films I haven't seen in a long time. I'm gonna have to go back and literally rewatch it.
That's one that holds up really well too. It doesn't, and there was a little bit of some 3D animation in Iron Giant, if my memory serves me correctly. But I agree with what you said. I think there's great characterization. I particularly like remember Harry Connick Jr. was the voice actor he's kind of like a beatnik character, like a 50s.
Right.
And his gig is he's a metal sculptor, and he makes these really offbeat metal creations, and that's why he lives in a junkyard, and that's why of course they try and stash the Iron Giant there. But of course it ends with a very positive, you can be who you want to be in life, and I think it's a message that rings true. Again, I find it hard to believe we're talking about a movie that's 24 years old.
Yeah.
Time waits for no man.
Nope, not at all.
So, and that also is lately I see Iron Giant getting a resurgence. He has action figures and this kind of thing now, which I'm always happy to see that. I don't have one, but I would love to get one.
Yeah, I think I'm in my library. I think I have a small one.
Do you? Yeah, I think I might have a little one too. I saw there's a new one where he's got the S on his chest. I'm like, I might have to buy that. I like to consider myself resistant to marketing a little bit because I realize I'm in all the target groups of these things.
Right.
But when I saw that, I was like, oh, the marketing's pulling me in. I've got to have the Iron Giant with the S on his chest. So we'll see. Probably next time we talk, I'll probably have one. I'll tell you about it.
Nice.
So I got a great one here for number 2. And JD, this was your pick. And I want you to go into some detail here. This is Ricky Tikki Tavi. This is the 1975 version, if I'm correct. And I believe that's Chuck Jones.
Chuck Jones, yeah.
A Titan.
When he did, I believe there's 3 films. He did this one, Cricket in Times Square, and
right, yeah.
There was I'm blanking on the 3rd film. I know he did one with a seal, but there was another film. But anyway, he did these 3 series. Oh, The Jungle Book.
Oh, right. Yeah, don't forget that one. Yeah.
Yeah, it was The Jungle Book. So but yeah, he did these 3 films, and Ricky Tikki Tavi is the one that I love the most. It's about the little boy and his pet mongoose. protecting him from the cobra, right? And it's and just the way he does it, and you see the Ricky Tikki Tavi's eyes, and they sparkle with those red emerald eyes, and you see him. He's just like, and the way the body would move and shift. It's just one of these things, I just remember from my childhood. And what's funny is I have all of those films on a Blu-ray upstairs somewhere. And it's just watching it, every now and again, you just see it. It's just like, oh, it still holds up. It's still a great film.
Yeah, a great story.
Yes.
Rudyard Kipling, right? Rudyard Kipling, I think.
I believe so. Yeah.
And I agree with what you said. And man, especially with the cobra, what a scary cobra.
Yeah.
And for Chuck Jones, one of the titans of animation. I've got a cousin who's an animator, and it'd be fair to say that Chuck Jones is a hero in animation circles. The same way that you and I would talk about Stan Lee or Jack Kirby or one of the titans of comics. So yeah, great choice, man. And again, some of these movies might be a little lesser known, but really our goal is, we like to talk about the things we love, right? And to try to share them with others and to spread positivity. And this next one is really a fun one. Are you ready for this? This is our number 1. It's from 1983. That's Ralph Bakshi and Frank Frazetta. Fire and Ice.
Yeah.
What a
Perhaps
triumph.
Oh yeah. Perhaps one of my favorite, of that era, one of my favorite films. The story I remember is Frank Frazetta. He was talking about he was working with, because it was all rotoscope, so they would shoot the actors and then lay the film over them and then trace them out. And Frank was there helping out, helping Ralph. And he said for some reason he would lay out these scenes, like he would do his thumbnail sequences, right? And the stunt actors couldn't run down this cliff. They were like, no, we'll break our ankles. We can't do it like that, and blah, blah, blah. And Frank Frazetta was like, what? And he ran up to the top of the hill and he barreled down it like a lunatic, right? And then he was like, that's how you do it, guys. And then after him, they all came down.
That's great.
They're like, if the 50-year-old guy could do it, what choice do we have?
Yeah, right, exactly.
And it was just that Frank was very active throughout his life. He was a very, very physical person throughout his entire life. So, he was one of those guys that, my understanding, he would rather discuss baseball with you than art.
No kidding? I didn't know that.
Yeah. He was a huge baseball fan. I think, I don't know if he played in the major leagues for a little while, but I know that was an aspiration of his. I think he played in the minor leagues. I don't know if he played, he might have played for a short time.
Interesting.
Yeah.
There's a couple of neat trivia things too about Fire and Ice. One of them is the script, of course, written by Roy Thomas and Jerry Conway.
Yes.
Two titans of the comic industry. And of course, many things they would be known for, but one of the main ones, Conan. Right? So you could, and of course, we're talking about, this is 83, this movie came out. And I'm pretty sure that the Conan movie came out in 82.
Right. And a lot of it was based on some of the comics they did. Yeah.
Right. So there was a little bit of a resurgence in the interest in Conan. Were you a Conan fan?
What's funny is I'm a huge fan of that first film. Right. But for some reason, I couldn't get into Robert E. Howard's writing. And I wasn't a big fan of the comics, not until later, because I'm a much bigger fan of, let's say, John Buscema and his artwork than I am of Conan. Right. But I've read a lot of good Conan comics. I really liked when, I guess it was Kurt Busiek and Carrie Nord were doing it over at Dark Horse. I was enjoying those. Yeah. And there was the French. It's gone into public domain in Europe, and they did a number of direct adaptations from Robert E. Howard's work. So it's like some of the most exact adaptations of that work. And what they do is they do the comic, beautiful artwork, and then in the back of the comic will be the story, the actual prose story that written by Robert E. Howard.
Yeah, neat.
Yeah. So it's a very, very interesting contrast for you to be able to read, to get into that. But yeah, it's funny though. I was never really that big of a Conan fan, but I love the original movie.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And it's funny. I'm maybe a little bit slightly the reverse, which I'm a fan of Roy Thomas and Jerry Conway. Right. But you could probably build a pretty good argument that Conan was my least favorite, and I don't know. That was, of course, when I was a kid. More so now. Right. And I was even into that kind of thing. Like I was into Lord of the Rings and a little bit this, the sword and sorcery angle. But I just never, for some reason, Conan didn't quite click with me. I'm not 100% sure why that is. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, during that era, there was a whole series of those science fantasy movies that came out. You had Beastmaster, you had Hawk the Slayer, you had Conan, you had Dragon Slayer, yeah, and they all came out pretty close to one another. Sword and the Sorcerer. There's a ton of them. Yeah.
My guess is, of course, I had read those types of stories when I was growing up, but right about those days, I was just getting clicked over to science fiction. And of course, Star Wars and science fiction were just about sweeping the globe between 77 and 84. So I think I got on that train and I didn't get off the train necessarily. Yeah, one question I'd like to ask you this. You mentioned a couple times about rotoscoping, and we didn't really touch on this in the earlier films, but it's especially prevalent in Fire and Ice.
Yes.
And first, would you mind, for the viewers that might not know what rotoscoping is, would you explain to us what it is?
Okay. Well, my rough definition from my faulty memory is rotoscoping is where they actually film an actor
Right.
doing a sequence, and then an animator will come in and they will animate over the actor. So they'll literally take a frame, lay an acetate over it, trace them out,
Right.
add in whatever elements they wanted to add in, because obviously, now you can make it, instead of some guy out in California running through a forest, now it's
A horned Viking or whatever, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So and then that was a hallmark of Rolf Bakshi. I mean, that he did that in Lord of the Rings. He
Correct.
did that in
Wizards, I think, has some.
Yeah, he did it in Wizards. I mean, as far as I know, he did it in all of his films. So yeah.
I think Don Bluth does some too.
He may have. It wouldn't surprise me.
Like the dance sequences and so forth. Or, again, I'm a layman, but to my eyes, it looks like it. Like I can kind of tell when something's being rotoscoped. And the first question I'd want to ask you, first of all, not everybody loves rotoscoping. If you talk to, like I mentioned, I have a cousin that's an animator and they are not fans of rotoscoping. There's kind of two camps, right? Like there's traditional animators and, what's a good way to put this? They almost look at rotoscoping like it's a type of cheating or an AI or something. But I get it why it helps for the posing and helps for the scene to film the guy first. Yeah. What do you think about that? I mean, do you prefer the rotoscoping or?
If it's done correctly, right? It's like anything else. It adds a certain level. There are times it's really smooth. And I think because of that, it's a little weird, right? Because that's the thing. When it's rotoscoped, you can kind of tell it's been rotoscoped, right?
Right. Whereas, you can tell.
Yeah, you can tell. Whereas if you watch a traditional animated film, it's still smooth in its movement, but there's a certain exaggeration. Whereas you don't really get that in rotoscoping. There's not that weird, stretch and pull type of thing that animators do.
Right. Their limbs tend to not stretch and it looks like somebody running down a hallway. And the example I would give, and by the way, viewers, we're talking about Fire and Ice, which is actually on Amazon Prime right now, if you want to check it out. And there's a couple of scenes where you'll definitely notice it. And I'm going to use this as my example. When they have the princess, the kidnapped princess is running from the monsters. Yeah. Forget what her name is right now. It doesn't matter for the example. She's kind of bouncy when she runs, and she's bouncy in a way that'll make you go, whoa, that doesn't really look like animation. That looks like a fairly, it's a large-breasted woman. That's what it would look like when she ran.
Robust young lady.
She's very robust, right? Corn-fed, as they might say. But you definitely notice it. Like that's the thing. If you were just drawing it all by hand, you might be tempted to not put that in there. And I do think it adds realism. I think it adds realism to it. Yeah,
definitely. But I mean, it's one of those things I'm interested in, because I can never figure, like, what did they do? Remember there's a scene with a big lizard, like a giant sized lizard. It's like, what did they do with that? Did they take pictures of a crocodile or some other type of?
That part I don't know. I do know that I read in an interview once, and this is rewinding back to Lord of the Rings, they rotoscoped the sequence on the bridge, and you can tell that it's men standing there being filmed, and it's almost a little silhouette-ish. And when they did the Balrog, he's actually on like ropes, and they lifted him up so he would be over. And you can, when they tell you that now, when you watch, like, oh yeah, it does look like somebody on ropes. Of course, you can't see the ropes. Yeah. But you get what they did. And this is, of course, in the days before, motion capture or anything like that. It's like you mentioned, they essentially filmed the scene and then they basically drew over it. And I guess I'd say I'm a fan if you had to pin me down for my answer, because I do think that sometimes an element of realism injected into the scene kind of works, especially when you got these wild backgrounds and monsters and things. So I think that, like in Fire and Ice, for example, where you're trying to impress upon somebody the designs of Frank Frazetta and the characterizations of Frazetta's work, it probably is a strength more than a weakness. Right. That's one man's opinion.
No, listen, I don't disagree. So, it's a very good point. If I may, I would like to interject a film that didn't make it on, but I would like it as an honorable mention.
Yeah, let's do some honorable mentions.
Okay, so for an honorable mention for myself, and here's one you might like because it has a lot of interesting music. Okay. It's a Rock and Roll,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Yeah. A good friend of mine, his name is John Celestri. He's an animator. He's currently doing comics. He has a comic currently on Kickstarter. So you might want to go check that out. But his name is John Celestri. He's one of the animators of the film. He animated one of the main characters and a couple of the other characters in it. Fantastic movie. It was done by a company called Nirvana, not Nelvana. I think it was Nirvana. But just to give you an idea of some of the songs, we have Cheap Trick, Lou Reed, Earth, Wind and Fire, Iggy Pop, Deborah Harry, um, and I think as I already mentioned Lou Reed, but yeah,
That's a
but those,
pretty
yeah.
solid lineup. Yeah. When you mentioned this the other day, I admit I did go and Google it and I looked it up. I haven't seen it, but I tell you, it is on my list.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those movies that I would definitely tell you to go check out. And go check out John Celestri's book. I believe there's a Fire Fist Angel. Just go check it out. It's very funky, very weird. If you like underground comics, that's going to be a book for you.
He'll appreciate that shout out, I'm sure. Yeah, and there's a couple of good ones. Like I say, when you make these lists, it's hard to include a lot of the things you want. And of course, one or two always fall by the wayside. I also thought about, there was Cool World back there.
Right. That's another Ralph Bakshi film.
Another Ralph Bakshi film. And you know what almost made it, because of its elements of animation, is Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Yeah.
But I guess, it has live action too. So we might have disqualified it, right?
Yeah, I think that's the reason why. But yeah, I mean, but it's still a high watermark as far as technique.
Right.
As far as that's concerned. Yeah, I mean, I remember I came up with I had sent you a whole list of all these weird French and foreign films, and I'm pretty sure you were like, "What the? I've never heard of these things." But there's one film in particular. It's called Nocturna. It's just filmed from Spain. Beautifully animated film about a young boy who lives in. He's an orphan, so he's living in an orphanage, and the moon is his friend, and he would open his I guess the other kids who were living with him, they hated him because he would move his bed next to the window, he would open it up, and he would look at the moon, and it would always smile at him. And then one night it was gone, and he was like, "What the hell?" And it leads him to this huge adventure of these creatures and beings that are from the night, and he goes on this fantastic adventure. Beautiful.
It sounds amazing. Look, I'll check that out too. Based on your recommendation, JD, I will definitely check that out. I dig your aesthetic. We've talked about this a lot, and we actually have quite a bit in common, it turns out. So I trust your recommendation. I also mentioned, I think, Fantastic Planet. That's another French one.
Yeah, that's another one. Yeah,
and that one's kind of trippy. Yeah, which trippy's good. And I'm sure at least one person is going to say to us, "What about Yellow Submarine?"
Oh yeah, it's another one I've never seen.
Yeah, I've only seen bits and pieces of it. I'm not the biggest Beatles fan. They're like a kind of a hair before my time, but I get it that they were awesome. So enough to where I'd want to check it out. And again, that's kind of a trippy one too, or psychedelic, however you want to put it. And I'm generally a fan of, something that'll expand the corridors of our minds. That's something I can get behind.
Yeah, Daphne is a huge fan of the Beatles and the Yellow Submarine. Because I think it was her dad was just a huge Beatles fan. So,
yeah. Well, and how do you not be? I mean, they've had so much, influence on pop culture. And as you and I said, if we would have started to include anime, boy, man, the door just kicks open. There's so many good ones. And, maybe it's, we'll save that for our next list. But I always want to give a quick shout out to, I'm a fan of Grave of the Fireflies. I don't know if you ever saw that one.
Oh, yeah. No, I haven't.
That one's a little dark.
Yeah, that's what it was. Everybody's like, "Oh, it's a little. It's one of those," and I was just like, "Oh, okay." Yeah,
you're not going to be skipping home from the theater after that, right? One. But again, sometimes movies, they're to provoke thought and to, to expand our knowledge of these different cultures and things. And in my opinion, like I'm a fan of the Studio Ghibli works. Am I saying that right?
Yes. I think so. I hope so.
Yeah, but they're among the best of the films. There's a lot of them in the anime that, to me, I don't think they're particularly well written. So, but like the Ghibli stuff is all just mind-blowingly good. So they're like the, he's the Disney, right?
Yeah, what's funny though is if you've ever seen a documentary with Miyazaki, one of the things that surprised me is that he will start a film. They don't work from scripts.
Oh, that doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, I was like, what? Like, how do you? And he's literally feeling his way through a film, you know. And I was like, and he's like trying to work his way to the end here. And I'm like, well, I mean, I'm sure he has a thought as to where he was going. Nausicaa was probably a little different because it was based on his manga, right? So I guess he probably knew where to snip and cut and just keep it to the relevant bits. But a movie like I think Spirited Away, like like he just felt his way through the film.
Right.
And like, okay.
And they do have a certain sort of dreamlike quality that I always assumed was intentional. But you saying that it does make a lot of sense, because I mean, to this day, if somebody held a gun to your head and said, describe what Spirited Away is about,
right,
and be like, well, it's a little bit, it's a little bit difficult to describe. And of course, sometimes that's the case with great fiction.
Right, you're like, little girl, parents turned into pigs.
Right, and No Face is taking her to the
right.
all the characters are super odd. And by the way, Princess Mononoke is a little bit like that too. It's like, well, the nature spirits are possessing the body of the. It's kind of hard to tell who the good guys and the bad guys are. It's just a very deep and sort of. It's a moving experience, but again, it's hard to really pin down what the heck is this movie about,
Yeah. Now, the one that makes me laugh about Princess Mononoke is that it's not really about Princess Mononoke. It's about the guy on the deer.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Riding on the red deer. It's really about him. I'm pretty sure they were like, well, we got to sell it. So, put the young lady on the front.
Yeah. And I remember the first time I saw that one of the ways that it was sort of marketed, if you remember, is that, of course, they had done like a big budget release with American voice actors.
Right.
And they did a script reworking, and the script reworking was by Neil Gaiman.
Right.
And I was like, wow, I'm a huge fan of Neil Gaiman. I'm going to love this. And I went and I mean, the first 20 minutes, I was like, what is going on here? Like, it was visually stunning, but it's a little bit hard to follow. You have to kind of see the whole thing and then digest it as a whole.
Right. Yeah. I guess at that point I was so used to seeing anime, none of it really surprised me.
Yeah. That was one of my first ones.
Yeah.
And Akira was one of my first ones too.
Oh yeah, that's another one. That's definitely one of my favorites. It's funny, when I first saw Akira, when we first started watching anime, we had a place out in Manhattan called Tokyo Video, right? And you could go up there and rent videos. You could buy videos. Not much different than Blockbuster, right? You take it out, bring it out, just watch another one. But no subtitles, no dubs, no subtitles, nothing. You watched it purely for the art. And I remember just seeing these are all bootlegs, right? These are all bootlegs. So you have the video, the VHS tape, and all on the side of it just says Akira. And I'm just like, how much is that? And I'm like, what? They're like, oh, it's a new movie. And I'm like, how much is it? $20. Okay, I forked over my 20. They gave it to me. I rented out a couple other films. Brought it over to Daphne's place, and her father, God rest his soul, this man loved technology and loved big things. So what did he have? He had a massive what is that? It's a projection screen TV.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah. So we put it up on the big projection. It was huge. It is a big thing. Just popped it in there, and we were all sitting there like, whoa. And it was just like, look at this, because it was just incredible to see it. And we just sat there, and you picked up everything from inflection and what's going on in the story.
Right.
And just like a good comic book, animation is the same way. You don't need to really understand what's coming out of their mouths. You just need to look at it, pay attention. You can see the story that's there, right? So it just goes on, and you can just tell what's going on. And we knew this was a battle of friends. This was a battle of brothers. This was, friends who care about friends who are doing wrong, and their friends trying to bring them back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
That's a great synopsis. You know, it's a
Mhm.
the best of the animated films are a little bit like getting on a ride, right?
Yeah.
It's a visual thrill ride, and you just sort of hold on, and this movie's going to take me to places that, in
Yeah.
some cases, animation, I think, can depict scenes and environments that would have been impossible to make any other way. Of course, I say this now with the advent of CGI, that's not as true as it used to be, but I still think that animation does it best.
Yes. 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 Um, just to throw in a couple of other anime uh, movies, I would suggest. Well, there's an older one called Lensman, right? That I love. It's based on a book series. I think the gentleman's name was E. Doc from the 50s.
Okay.
And it's called Lensman because they have this little lens on their wrists. And it was a precursor to Green Lantern. Everybody feels that this is where the guy who invented Green Lantern got it from. And
Oh,
they were like intergalactic space force, and these lenses gave them their powers, right? And it was called Lensman, and it's just a batshit crazy, bonkers,
I'll check that out too.
animated film. It's a beautiful film. That one, I'm pretty sure you can find it on YouTube because
Okay.
I don't think they've ever done a master redub. Like I have a copy that's dubbed that's on VHS. The only way I still have a working VHS machine. It's the only way I can watch it. Oh, well, and I found it on YouTube. So I think you'll find it there. I think that the full version on it. So it's a lot of fun. Another one would be Summer Wars. Um, another fantastic movie, beautifully illustrated movie. But that one has some CGI and it's some traditional and CGI is mixed. But it's a beautiful film. Like I said, it's about a family at war that's coming back together. It's a great film. But the film that I would tell everyone to go watch, drop everything and go watch this movie. It's called Redline. And Redline is like a pulse pounding action race car movie. And mind you, I'm not a big race car guy, but this is just a bonkers movie. It's about an intergalactic space race, right? And there's this guy and he drives around in a Corvette. Everybody else is in these super giant size, crazy, machines of mass destruction just barreling down like 400 miles an hour. And this guy's in this Corvette just jamming it. And it is just, it's incredible. And here's the thing, it's all hand drawn. This movie was done in 2000, I believe it's 2007. And it nearly destroyed the company, like it nearly forced them into bankruptcy. And so few people have seen it. It has a great score. I think the story is funny and heartwarming. Is it the greatest story in the world? No, but it's a fun story. And I think it's just one of these movies that if you see it visually, it looks incredible. I mean, it's just like wow.
Redline.
All
right, I'll check that one out.
Yeah.
So in closing, JD, I want to say thanks so much for coming on the show, man. This was a really fun list to do.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. Yeah, this was really cool. Like
Yeah,
I said, I mean, this is the sort of thing we talk about for hours.
Yeah. And like I say,
much
I'd be happy to come back and we'll redo the next wave and we'll talk about some anime stuff in more detail. We can make that be our part too. But before we go, why don't you tell us, tell the viewers, that is, where we can find you and if there's anything that you'd like to emphasize.
Okay. Well, let's see, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, DeviantArt, all under JD Calderon. So you can find me there. The other places you can find me is theoswaldchronicles.com, right? Which is my comic book done as a webcomic. Occasionally I'll do a Kickstarter for it. Occasionally I'll do it. I just finished one. There'll probably be another one up in 2 or 3 weeks. But currently is my other series, which you can find at Tall Tales, which is on talltalesonline.com. But we have this one currently on Kickstarter, already finished. And it's actually the first Tall Tales comic that's in color.
Nice.
So Daphne went ahead and she originally illustrated. I originally wrote it. That's why I wrote it. You could tell because there's a lot of words. Don't know when to shut up. Don't know when to shut up. Don't know what an editor is. Jesus Christ. It's one of those
I feel you. I feel you, brother. I'm like that too.
They're like less is more. No, it's not.
Yeah. And
Right.
I just want to emphasize to the viewers, if you like the kind of material that we've been talking about tonight, please check out JD's work. I think you're going to love it. And it's quite original and definitely one of the pioneers of our industry. I'm a fan, JD.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate that.
All right.
You know,
So
yeah.
thanks again, everybody, for watching. Thanks, JD, for coming. This is a special episode of Holden's 11, and we will look forward to seeing you next week. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.